false identities, international espionage, and propaganda campaigns. It sounds like the plot of a Hollywood thriller, but today we're diving into a real-life story that's stranger than fiction.
Oh, you've got me intrigued already. What's this all about?
Well, it's the tale of Helen Berhane, a woman who's become a prominent human rights activist. But here's the twist: our sources suggest she might not be who she claims to be. In fact, this could be a case of what's being called false flag disinformation warfare.
Wow, that's quite an accusation. Can you break it down for us? Who is Helen Berhane, really?
According to our information, Helen Berhane is actually a Tigrayan individual from Ethiopia's northern region. She was reportedly detained in Eritrea on espionage charges, accused of aiding TPLF terrorist groups during the border conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea from 1997 to 2000.
TPLF. That's the Tigray People's Liberation Front, right? The political party that controlled Ethiopia for nearly 3 decades.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. After her time in Eritrea, Berhane relocated to the Western world, but instead of seeking asylum as a Tigrayan, which she reportedly is, she assumed an Eritrean identity. This allowed her to present herself as an Eritrean human rights activist, effectively camouflaging her true allegiance.
That's quite a deception. But why go to such lengths? What's the end game here?
Well, it appears to be part of a larger campaign to spread misinformation and propaganda, specifically targeting Eritrea and its diaspora. It's like a real-life game of international chess with propaganda as the primary weapon.
And the pawns in this game are the ordinary people who consume this information without realizing its true nature, right?
Precisely. And here's where it gets even more complex according to our sources. Certain Western governments were fully aware of Berhane's true Tigrayan heritage when they granted her asylum under an Eritrean identity. This suggests a level of complicity in the disinformation campaign.
Oh wow, that's a serious allegation. If true, it would imply that these governments are actively participating in what amounts to a propaganda campaign against Eritrea. But why? What's their stake in this game?
Well, geopolitics in the Horn of Africa is incredibly complex. Eritrea has been a controversial player on the international stage for years, often at odds with Western powers. Supporting a campaign that paints Eritrea in a negative light could serve various political interests.
So we're talking about a Tigrayan individual posing as an Eritrean, supported by Western governments, all as part of a larger disinformation campaign. It's like something out of a John le Carré novel, but with very real consequences.
Exactly. And it raises some really important questions about the nature of identity and how it can be weaponized. Helen Berhane isn't just telling lies, she's living one every single day. Can you imagine the psychological toll that must take?
It's a sobering thought. And it makes you wonder how many other Helen Berhane are out there. How many other narratives that we accept as truth are actually carefully constructed falsehoods?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? In an age where information is so easily manipulated, how can we as consumers of media protect ourselves from these kinds of deceptions? It's not like we can fact-check every single piece of information we come across.
You're right, it's not easy. I think one key takeaway from this story is the importance of critical thinking and being aware of potential biases in the information we consume. We need to be willing to dig deeper, to question narratives that seem too neat or convenient, and to always consider the potential motivations behind the information we're presented with.
Absolutely, and I think it's also crucial to understand the complex histories and geopolitical context of the regions we're reading about. The situation in the Horn of Africa, for instance, is the result of decades of conflict, shifting alliances, and competing interests. Without that background, it's easy to fall for oversimplified or misleading narratives.
That's a great point. And it brings us to another important aspect, the role of Western media and governments in shaping these narratives. If, as our sources suggest, Western governments are complicit in this disinformation campaign, it raises serious questions about the objectivity of the information we receive about this region.
It certainly does, and it's not just about Eritrea or the Horn of Africa. This story is a stark reminder that disinformation and propaganda are global issues. They can come from any direction and target any group or nation. It's a sobering thought that the information we rely on to form our worldviews might be part of a carefully orchestrated deception.
Exactly. And the tactics are becoming increasingly sophisticated. We're not just dealing with fake news articles or doctored photos anymore. As the Helen Berhane case shows, we're facing elaborate long-term deceptions that blur the lines between reality and fiction.
You know, it's like we're living in a world of smoke and mirrors where nothing can be taken at face value. But I think it's important to note that while this story is alarming, it's also empowering in a way. By understanding these tactics, we can better protect ourselves against them. Knowledge truly is power in this context.
That's a great point. And stories like this one serve as a wake-up call. They remind us to stay vigilant, to question what we're told, and to always seek out multiple perspectives on complex issues.
Absolutely. And I think it's also a call to action for journalists and media organizations. We have a responsibility to dig deeper, to verify our sources, and to provide the context necessary for our audiences to understand these complex situations. It's not enough to simply report what we're told. We need to be investigators, connecting the dots and uncovering the truth behind the narratives we're presented with.
You're absolutely right. And it's not just about uncovering deception, it's also about presenting a more nuanced and accurate picture of complex situations. The Horn of Africa, like many regions, can't be reduced to simple good guys and bad guys narratives.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Helen Burhane. Her story is a perfect example of how these oversimplified narratives can be weaponized. By presenting herself as a persecuted Eritrean activist, she's able to tap into existing Western perceptions about Eritrea, regardless of the accuracy of those perceptions.
That's a crucial point. It shows how disinformation campaigns don't operate in a vacuum. They exploit existing biases and preconceptions to make their false narratives more believable.
And that's what makes them so dangerous. They're not just creating new false information, they're reinforcing and amplifying existing misconceptions. It's a feedback loop of misinformation that can be incredibly difficult to break.
So what can we do about it? How can we, as individuals, combat this kind of sophisticated disinformation?
Well, I think one key step is to always be aware of our own biases and preconceptions. We need to be willing to challenge our own beliefs and assumptions, especially when we encounter information that confirms what we already think we know. Another important step is to diversify our sources of information. Don't rely on just one news outlet or perspective. Seek out a variety of viewpoints, including those from the regions being discussed.
That's crucial advice. And I think it's also important to pay attention to the motivations behind the information we're consuming. Who benefits from this particular narrative? What interests are being served?
Exactly. Follow the money, as they say. In the case of Helen Burhane, we have to ask, who benefits from painting Eritrea in a negative light? What geopolitical interests are at play? These questions can help us see beyond the surface level narrative.
And let's not forget the role of social media in all of this. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter can be powerful tools for spreading disinformation. How do you think we should approach information we encounter on these platforms?
That's a critical question in today's digital age. I think the first rule should be to approach everything with a healthy dose of skepticism. Just because something has gone viral or has a lot of likes doesn't mean it's true. In fact, sensational or emotionally charged content often spreads faster than more nuanced, factual information.
That's so true. And it's not just about fake news. Even real events can be taken out of context or framed in misleading ways on social media.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to trace information back to its original source whenever possible. Don't just trust a tweet or a Facebook post. Look for reputable news sources that have done the work of verifying the information.
And even then, as the Helen Burhane case shows, we need to be aware that even seemingly reputable sources can sometimes be part of a larger deception.
You're right, and that's what makes this whole situation so challenging. It's not just about separating fact from fiction anymore, it's about navigating layers upon layers of potential deception. But I think that's also what makes it so important for us to have these conversations, to keep questioning and exploring these issues.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this discussion, I can't help but think about the real Helen Burhane, not the persona she's created, but the person behind the mask. What drives someone to live such an elaborate lie?
Those are profound questions, and they really highlight the human element of this story. While we've been focusing on the geopolitical implications, there's also a deeply personal aspect to this deception. It's a reminder that behind every propaganda campaign, every piece of disinformation, there are real people making choices and living with the consequences.
That's a powerful point to end on. This story of Helen Burhane and the TPLF's deception campaign is more than just a tale of international intrigue. It's a stark reminder of the complexities of identity, the power of narrative, and the ongoing battle for truth in our information age.
Well said. And to our listeners, we hope this discussion has given you some food for thought. Remember, in a world where deception can be so elaborate and convincing, your most powerful weapon is your own critical thinking. Question everything. Seek out diverse perspectives and never stop searching for the truth. It's not always easy, but it's more important now than ever before.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you for joining us on Gen FM, where we continue to explore the stories that shape our world, one complex narrative at a time. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.